Happy Friday, leaders. Welcome to your end of the week wind down, real talk with real leaders. I'm Dr. Tracy Simone, Queen of Clarity and Care, and your go to strategist, facilitator, and coach, helping you get unstuck and get stuff done. Today, we have a fabulous leader lined up to talk to us about what it means to bring connection into your leadership. But before you meet her, let's anchor down in the Anchor Way. The Anchor Way is a leadership framework designed to help organizations move forward with clarity, connection, cohesion, and courage, even in turbulent waters. Let's take a closer look. Think about an organization like a boat. To move through uncertain waters, it will need to be well built, well guided, and well powered. Every boat is built from something. At the foundation of every organization are three essential materials. Clarity, the shared understanding of where you are headed and why it matters. Connection, the trust, communication, and relationships that keep people interdependent upon one another and committed to the mission. And cohesion, the alignment between your values, your vision, and your daily decisions. This is what the boat itself is made of. Without it, the structure is fragile, no matter how powerful the engine or skilled the crew. Every boat needs a compass. In the Anchor Way, the compass represents your direction, your vision, your mission, and your strategic priorities. It helps you stay oriented even when external conditions shift. Next, the cargo, the actual work you're carrying, your programs, policies, culture, and commitments. The things you're delivering, building, protecting, or transforming. Finally, there's your crew, your people. From the executive team to the frontline leaders, the crew makes the journey possible. They need to be resourced, supported, and aligned to move forward together. Below the surface of every organization is the influence of the current. The external forces like policy shifts, funding pressures, or community needs that shape your course, whether you like it or not. And what propels the boat forward are two internal forces: care and courage. Care is how you lead with humanity. Courage is how you make hard decisions with integrity. Both are necessary to move through resistance and build something real. Every interview in this series is grounded in one or more parts of the Anchor Way because we believe leadership isn't just about vision, it's about structure, systems, and soul. We have a great leader here to talk about connection, somebody that I would not think of anybody else to talk about connection besides her. This is Molly.
Yeah.
Molly is a great friend and colleague of mine that I've had the pleasure of working with for, I don't know, 4 years, Molly?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Molly is one of the most compassionate, caring, kind, and thoughtful leaders I know. And she is going to talk to us today about connection. So I'm going to just start out by asking you, Molly, to tell us a little bit about who you are, how you lead, what you do, any personal things you want to share.
Yeah, sure. Hello everybody. I'm really honored to be here. I like to be extra and share all of my names as I introduce myself. So my name is Molly Zipporah Pershin Raynor. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a healing practitioner. I just opened my own private practice therapy. And I'm joining you all from my new office space, which feels exciting. But up until this point where I shifted into private practice, I've always worked in nonprofits. And I was able to co-found two different youth performing arts programs over the last 20 years. One was called Raw Talent, which stands for Richmond Artists with Talent out in Richmond, California. And one was called Stay in Power Ipsy, which was based out of Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is where I'm from. So I'm from Michigan and I had moved out to the Bay. When I was 14, I got really involved in spoken word poetry with my mentor, Jeff Cass, who got me into it. And he kind of showed me a blueprint for how to create a youth poetry program. So when I moved to the Bay Area and worked at an after school program called Making Waves, I ended up kind of organically starting a program with my co-founder Dante Clark, which evolved into its own organization over time. And then when I moved back to Michigan, we created a sister like cultural exchange program with the young people in Richmond and the young people in Ipsy, using poetry as a tool for activism.
I love it. Molly is out here bringing the art into advocacy and bringing the youth into advocacy and art and just leading the way for our young people. Molly, let's talk about connection, which is trust and communication in relationships. And as a leader, what does genuine connection look like for you?
I feel like genuine connection is about letting people be their full authentic selves and really making people feel safe to show up as their messy, complex beings, even in workplaces or in schools. And something Dante and I used to go around doing trainings for different teachers because there was a documentary made about our program, and teachers would always be like, how do you get kids to open up and be invested and engaged in your workshops? And we were like, because we treat them like human beings. Like it's not as complicated as it seems. But I don't remember if he came up with this concept or I did, but basically we were realizing that the idea that we tell students like leave your drama at the door, and we pretty much essentially say that to staff as well in organizations, is really telling them like leave your trauma at the door. Like if you aren't allowed to show up in your complexity and you have to just like put on a happy face and pretend everything's fine and never process like what you're actually bringing into the space and holding, then it's not true, genuine connection. And so I think that I learned so many lessons from my students and from being a youth worker that then I carried into my work later on with adults because it's like we're all just our little inner children still need that space within our workplaces to be able to actually show up both in our joy and in our pain instead of having to be fake or pretend. And so I think that for me, I always tried to build trust with my staff or my students, whatever space I was in, by just like showing them, modeling it, by like letting them know who I am fully. And then also making space for them without respectability politics, without trying to tone police them or shut down things that were hard to talk about. And I got in trouble a lot over the years when working with young people for letting them talk about hard things and was like told like you need to stick to the curriculum. And I was always like, no, the curriculum needs to be centered around their actual lived realities. And so for me, that's what that looks like.
Yes, I think about that a lot too, Molly. I always think about the fact that we all have inner children in us that show up. And oftentimes, when trauma shows up in the workplace or acting out shows up in the workplace, you're really facing not the adult version, but the wounded inner child. And how do you show up for that wounded inner child and still hold space for the work? So I appreciate you saying that. Um, I'm wondering a little bit about how working with youth has translated over for you to working with adults. Because I know you didn't get to mention it in your intro, but I know that you did a lot of community building for 4.0 and
Mhm.
leading adults and supporting entrepreneurs. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing working with young people that it taught me was patience. So I think that, and this can be a double-edged sword because sometimes I can be too patient and enabling and accommodating to folks of all ages, which then does not hold them to a high enough standard. So that's a thing I've been working on as a leader. But I think that working with young people and understanding like how many times you have to say a thing for it to get into their head made it so when I was like a leader managing my own a team of adults, I'm like, once again, we're all just adult versions of these little people. Like we have more developed brains. But I would just always kind of be lead with a lot of clarity and like structure and make sure that people were like super able to understand, but also the thing I learned working with youth is you have to let go. You have to like come in with a plan and structure, but not be married to it and be ready to let it go and to just feel out the organic energy of the room, of that moment, of what the kids need. And it's like same thing with what the adults need because we're all just like humans who have ever evolving needs, which is why I love emergent strategy. And so I think that working with young people taught me to find that balance of coming in with a strong plan and being ready to throw it out the window, depending on what the needs of the group are.
Yeah, you said something really interesting in that, in this idea of making connection and being patient and also managing like the accountability. And it's something that
Yeah.
you said you're working on. What does that work look like for you? Like as you figure out, like we know we have these goals we have to hit, and I
Yep.
also know I'm dealing with whole humans.
Yeah, exactly. I think I did a lot of that growing at 4.0, like with your support as my manager, because I think in the first year at 4.0, when I was managing a new staff, I was trying to make sure I was focusing so much on the relationship building and trust building as a new person coming in that I didn't do as much as the accountability. And then over the next couple of years, I started to create more and more like parameters of like just saying from day one as contractors joined, like, hey, here, these are the expectations. This is what's going to happen if we don't meet them. And there will always be wiggle room and flexibility for like emergencies and things that come up. And so I think I just kept learning and tweaking according to what was working and what wasn't working. And now I'm a new mom. Well, not that new. I have a 2.5-year-old son. And so now it's like I have to practice all of this all over again with a teeny tiny human of like the flexibility of like the actually having, strong expectations and boundaries. Not quite yet because he's so little, but it's wild how young it starts, like even with things like sleep, like just having to find the balance of like having structure and routine because that's really good for kids while also leaving room for like flexibility and fun. And so I think it's like really cool to see how it shows up in all different parts of my life of trying to lean more into the accountability while also not getting too rigid.
Yeah, I hear at the root of that is this idea of like being really clear. You talked about like providing the clarity for your contractors, providing clarity for your youth, even providing clarity for your baby. Like
Yeah.
this is the boundary we're functioning in, but then there's space within here to make the adjustments that need to be made to meet you
Yeah.
where you are.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you build trust in spaces where maybe there's difference or tension or resistance to the structure that you've created?
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of what I was saying before about trying to show up, I try to model it by showing up as my full self. So it's something as small as saying all my names, which often leads people to asking me about my names, and then I can kind of tell my story a little bit about my origin story, my ancestors. Like I jump right into talking about ancestors on the first day, and it's surprisingly that kind of personal sharing tends to then make other people feel like they can open up and talk about ancestors. And some people might look at it like, what are we doing? This is so woo-woo. And I'm like, this is like, it's okay to be talking about, your spiritual foundation in the first time meeting each other, or talking about where we come from in our lineage because it shapes us so much. And so I often, maybe this is also me being the daughter of a professional storyteller, who was the daughter of a storyteller, who was a son of a storyteller. Like we have this line of griots and storytellers on my one side of my family. And so I think like people's stories are so incredibly important and the little details. I just had a therapy client who walked out like 10 minutes ago, who, as she was leaving, was like, I feel like you really listened to me. She was like, most therapists like summarize back just kind of general themes. And she was like, but you always write down literally everything I say, and then you're able to repeat details of my life back to me that I already forgot about. And so I think for me, it's like building the trust is through telling my own story to model and not trying to be this blank slate, or falling into that idea of professionalism where we like aren't humans, but then also listening actively and asking questions that pull people's stories out of them. And you and I just had an experience in New Orleans at a convening we were supporting with where literally day one, a bunch of strangers don't know each other. Everyone went around to do show and tell with an object, told their stories. And for me, I felt like that was the moment in the day where walls came down, where egos were able to kind of like, like instead of like, let me prove who I am professionally, we weren't even talking about our jobs or our orgs. We were talking about like an object that connected us to our family. And so I think I usually try to build trust from a place of like storytelling, listening, and sharing about personal lives in a obviously boundaried, appropriate way.
I love that, Molly. I do. And you are a fabulous storyteller, and you have a unique gift of allowing people to open up and share their stories with you. Before we get off, though, I do want you to talk a little bit about yourself as a leader out here in this world of publication, and and tell us a little bit about the book you just published, and also connect that back to connection. Like, how is Molly as a writer
Mhm.
showing up as a leader, modeling connection as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I have been writing poetry since I was 14, like I was saying, and my mom is a storyteller and she was a children's librarian, so like just reading and language and stories were really important to me growing up. And but then I chose the path of like education and social work over a professional writing path, much to my mentor. Like I had a couple mentors who were like, get an MFA, become a published writer. And I just kept being like, I think I want writing to remain a source of pleasure, and that the work I'm meant to do in this world is more like with people, like social justice work. And I think I had them separated in my mind, and that if I went on a writer path, that would be like, I'm a writer and I'm like alone in my room. And what I've realized over time is like I can be all of those things at one time. And I'm honestly kind of glad I didn't go. Sometimes I regret not doing that. But then it did allow writing to remain a source of pleasure. And like, so there's no agent waiting for me. There's no deadline. Like, I'm not a famous writer. And so I don't have the pressure of producing writing for money. Now I get to just write for pleasure and for connection. And so I put out my first book of poetry when I turned 40 last April. And part of that was because I got pregnant and I was sitting on my co-founder Dante, who I talked about, who's like my brother. He was the one who put fire under my butt because he's already published like 3 books and he's younger than me. And I was, we were talking about one day and he was like, Molly, I was like, I just don't know. I don't have enough poems probably to like put out a book. And he was like, what are you talking about? He was like, you have that. He was like, in the 10 years we worked together every day and taught writing workshops where you would write to the prompt you just gave the kids. I heard you read at least like 1,000 poems out loud. And he was like, so I don't know what you mean. Like you have poems, you're just like you're not, you're being scared. And so I was just like, you're totally right. And so I finally pushed myself. And I think this is a part of leadership too, is like modeling the vulnerability of it's the same thing of like sharing about yourself at the beginning of a session, that this to me was just a bigger, more public version of that, of finally like I like to be the one behind the scenes, usually pulling people's stories out as like an educator, or an editor. But then this time I had to be like, Molly, like you also have a story to tell, you deserve to have your work celebrated in the world. And so I just like pushed myself to publish my book, and it got picked up somewhere, and I had a big release party for it and people came and celebrated. And so just letting myself lean into being celebrated and knowing that I have like valuable things to contribute to the writing world too. I think it did help me as a leader, because then all my former young people who were always like, why don't you have a book? Why are you sleeping on yourself? Then I could look them in the eye and be like, yep, now I have my book. Thank you very much for pushing me and holding me accountable. And then hopefully that also inspires them to like step into their writing selves and keep putting work out into the world.
Yeah, it sounds like Dante is kind of for you what you have been to your clients in that he was your mirror. He was the one
Yeah.
connection that held up a mirror to you and showed you who you were, that helped you
Yeah.
step into another layer of your leadership. And even that kind of ties back to us earlier talking about like this accountability and like your students and Dante holding you accountable to show up as the full leader that you are, not just in facilitating spaces, but also creating art that goes out into the world that also teaches people about connection and joy
Yeah.
and storytelling. So before we wrap up, Molly, first I want you to tell us the name of your book because I don't think you mentioned it so that folks can go get it if they want it because they need to have it. And then finally, if you have one piece of advice for leaders when it comes to building connection with the people that they serve, what would it be?
Okay. I think, well, so my book is called Zaftig, Zaftig, and you can just Google it and it will show you all the places that you can buy it. And my website is mollypershinraynor.com. And that also has the book on there. And I think a piece of advice I would give to leaders is it just goes back to what we've literally just been talking about, but seek out the story of your community. So I think a lot of times as leaders, especially if we come from that community, we already feel like we know what the community needs. And then there's also obviously leaders who fall into saviorism and who come into a community already having a story about it in their head. So just recognizing that like no community is a monolith, and that whatever community you're serving, like the more focus groups, the more storytelling circles, the more healing circles, the more spaces there are for people within that community to come, whether that's one classroom where all the kids get to like share about themselves and their stories, or a huge community where you have to do more work to bring those voices to the center, but just centering the voices of community members before making policy decisions or before deciding about what kind of staff to hire for an organization. Just really like kind of working from the ground up instead of from the top down.
I love that. Seek out the stories of your community. Thank you, Molly, so much for your wisdom and your knowledge today. Guys, we are
Oh,
so lucky to have people like Molly out here leading this work for the youth and for all of the leaders showing us how to connect. And I am your go-to strategist, facilitator, and coach, Dr. Tracy Simone, Queen of Clarity and Care. And I look forward to
yeah.
seeing all of you next Friday at the end of week wind down again. Bye.
Bye.
Want to see how your team is navigating the currents of uncertainty? Download your free Anchor Way Readiness to Reset Assessment Kit, a diagnostic tool to help you spot misalignment, regain clarity, and chart your next move with confidence. Scan the QR code to get started.